The thyroid is something that's become an online catch-all word for various health issues, but not many people understand its actual function. This gland sits in the front of the neck, secreting hormones to regulate everything from metabolism to breathing to brain development, and that's just to name a few. As you can imagine, having a problem with your thyroid can cause a whole host of issues. Dr. Ann Coppola says the most common culprit is called hypothyroidism, which is when the gland isn't making enough thyroid hormone.
It can be due to inflammation of the thyroid from something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That is an autoimmune condition generally inherited. It can also be due to removal of the thyroid, say someone has thyroid cancer, their thyroid nodules, or radiation treatment to the neck for a cancer that someone had, years ago for something else. So anything that can cause destruction of the thyroid gland can lead to hypothyroidism.
Coppola is a professor of medicine in the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Thyroid hormone is made up by the two hormones T4 and T3. But before we knew anything about these specifics, doctors in the 1890s realized that they could treat the condition by giving patients ground-up sheep thyroid glands.
And so for years, that was what was available. It ultimately transitioned to pig thyroid, but it was ground-up thyroid glands.
It doesn't have FDA approval because it precedes the FDA. It's been around to treat patients since before the FDA was even created. So sometimes those medications are called grandfathered in because they've been around since before the FDA approval process was required for medications.
That's Tennille Davis, Chief Advocacy Officer for the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding. This ground-up pig thyroid is called desiccated thyroid extract, or DTE. And though some patients still use it today, it's no longer the first choice for treatment. Once scientists realized that DTE worked because of the two hormones, T4 and T3, they created synthetic forms of these hormones, which is what most patients use today.
It was also recognized that T4 is converted to T3 just by plucking off a single iodine in the periphery in certain tissues so that the body can make its own T3. And even in a normal person, about 80% of the circulating T3 is made by peripheral, what we call deiodination. And that's one of the things that we like about it. And we know that the body can make its own T3 from the T4. And that part of it is still absolutely regulated by the body, even in hypothyroidism. It's separate from what's going on in the thyroid.
Because of this, Coppola says many patients only take synthetic T4 and let their bodies naturally convert some of it to T3.
What we try to do is keep people on the minimum dose of thyroid medication they need so that their bodies can regulate. That's actually the more natural way to do it, is to say, okay, we're going to let your body do everything you can, and we'll only supplement it if it needs a little help.
Coppola says most doctors prescribe levothyroxine, which is the recommended first-line therapy for hypothyroidism. However, a small percentage of patients are still taking DTE.
It's really people who are maybe unhappy on levothyroxine who find someone who say, well, I'm going to have you try this and see if it helps. Or other people from the very start, they're told this is natural and you should take it. And what's interesting about this and this whole natural premise is that excipients, the things that are put into the pill to make it a pill and to give it stability over time, those are used in these desiccated thyroid extracts. So it has kind of preservatives in there and fillers and things to help it get absorbed, just like the levothyroxine products do. And so that's where this natural claim doesn't hold as much water as you would want it to, because there are still other things, additives, that are in these pills that are in fact necessary to have a longer shelf life.
Still, Davis says the few people who take DTE feel a big difference with the drug.
I'm a thyroid patient. I don't take animal thyroid. I take synthetic T3 and T4. So I'm not pushing for people to be on that as like a first line treatment by any means. But as a real pharmacist, I really have seen patients where it's made a huge difference in their lives. So it's a very small percentage that take these animal thyroid products, but the ones that take them are really passionate about the therapy and how much it's made a difference in their lives.
Davis says that there's no clear evidence on why some patients respond better to DTE over synthetic hormones, but she's seen many people make the switch and feel like a new person in just a few weeks. But not long from now, these patients won't be able to get their usual prescription of DTE. In August, the FDA sent letters to manufacturers and distributors of unapproved animal-derived thyroid medications that states these products will no longer be allowed for commercial use. The FDA is concerned with the safety and effectiveness of these medications, which Coppola says is partly due to how DTE is dosed. While the synthetic products are dosed in micrograms, DTE is prepared differently.
The way that the desiccated thyroid extracts are dosed is based on a really old approach. They're in grains. And a grain is technically 64.7 milligrams, and it's based on literally how much a grain of barley weighs. So back in the day when there were apothecaries, they would dispense certain medications. Aspirin used to be one of them. 5 grains was the 325 milligrams. And this is held over so that in some cases they're actually considered to be 60 micrograms and others 65 micrograms. But the desiccated thyroid extract is in grains. And what happens is in each grain, there is 38 micrograms of T4 and 9 micrograms of T3, and then 59 milligrams. So there's a difference between micrograms and milligrams, 59 milligrams of all the other stuff that was in the pig's thyroid.
The FDA is concerned that the additional biological matter from the pig increases the risk of impurities in the drug, and that this older process leads to inconsistent dosing.
And we do know how much is in a grain. That part is somewhat standardized. But what the FDA was really concerned about is how do you know in each of these grains that these patients are taking, how much is actually in there, and is it standardized from batch to batch and from manufacturer to manufacturer? And that's really what the question is.
Thyroid hormone replacement medications need to be dosed very carefully for each patient, because even slight variations can make a difference in how well it works and the side effects patients can experience.
Treatment of hypothyroidism has what we call a narrow therapeutic window. It's almost like Goldilocks. Too much is bad, too little is bad, just right is just right. And so we need to make sure that what's in our pills is what's in the pill, because we're making adjustments for people. And if the lot to lot variability is an extra factor in there, we can't do a good job.
In addition to the batch to batch concerns, Coppola says the concentration of T4 and T3 is different in DTE than synthetic hormones. DTE has higher amounts of T3, which means that if a patient is taking the same amount of T4 that's in the synthetic product, they're getting much more T3.
T3 is somewhat of a stimulant, right? That's how we think about thyroid hormone. And it can overstimulate your heart, and it can overstimulate bone turnover in your bones. And it may not be so good in the long term for your brain. And we know this from studies of people who endogenously make too much T3. There are hyperthyroidism where you make a little too much T4, and some people make a little too much T3. And in those cases, when you look long term, you can see that there are potential adverse effects.
Coppola thinks that the stimulating effects of extra T3 is why some patients report feeling better on DTE, but she says it doesn't necessarily mean that the condition is being properly treated.
You may feel a little like, okay, but then your body is going to adapt and try to get your levels and get your body back to what it would have normally been. So you don't feel that anymore. And they say, hey, I don't feel as good anymore. And so then the person says, well, you just need more. So you give them more and you feel a little bit better again, but then you don't feel it. And over time, what happens is there's this adaptation process that happens until it can't anymore. But people often end up on what equivalently would be considered very high doses of these preparations because of that.
A fix to this extra T3 would be compounding, a pharmaceutical process that customizes medications for patients. Compounding pharmacists could adjust the levels of T4 and T3 in each dose depending on what the patient needs. However, this new decision by the FDA has made that impossible. Part of the FDA's response involves a reclassification of a protein in animal thyroid glands that holds the T3 and T4 hormones together. It's been reclassified as a biologic product, which is a category that's not allowed to be compounded.
It comes from a rule that went into effect in 2020 that was, I don't think the purpose of the rule was to stop compounding of biologics. I think the purpose of the rule was to improve access to other manufacturers of insulin. But one of the kind of side effects of the rule is that it prevented compounding. And, granted, biologics are more complicated than traditional small molecule drugs. I can see definitely that there could be potentially more risk.
But Davis argues that DTE shouldn't be in that category.
We are in the process of creating a citizens petition to the FDA, so they will have to respond to that at some point. We have lots of patients sending in letters to the FDA asking for them to not regulate this medication as a biologic to essentially reverse their decision.
But since the original ruling still stands, the FDA has instructed physicians to transition their patients using DTE over to synthetic products. The industry has been given a 1-year grace period before unapproved animal-derived thyroid products are prohibited.
And it's not straightforward, honestly. We don't have standard algorithms for how to do it. It hasn't been studied. Anecdotally, yeah, I've done it in practice before, but we look at the thyroid levels. Luckily, we're able to measure them in the blood, but what we're not necessarily able to see is the other types of adaptations that the body may have happened at the level of these receptors that the thyroid hormones bind to. When there's too much around, they downregulate so that the body's not overstimulated as well. So if you suddenly take that away, you have to give time for the body to readapt and kind of upregulate things and get those deionases going again that weren't working. Like, you can't just stop and switch. Often you have to kind of titrate them and adjust them back.
Which Coppola has successfully done before, and hopefully there are guidelines released for other physicians who don't have similar clinical experience. You can find more information about Dr. Ann Coppola, Tennille Davis, and all of our guests on our website, ingoodhealthpodcast.org. For more behind the scenes, follow In Good Health Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.